The sun had not yet crested the horizon, but the air was already biting. King Darius stood before the heavy stone that blocked the entrance to the pit, his hands, pale and shaking, pressed against the rough, unyielding surface. He traced the hardened wax of his own signet ring, the mark that had condemned his most trusted servant to this dark enclosure. He had signed the decree in haste, trapped by the rigid logic of his own law, and now the silence from behind the stone was absolute. It was a suffocating, heavy quiet that offered no comfort. He leaned his forehead against the cold rock, the grit scratching his skin, and closed his eyes. The palace guards stood at a distance, their gazes fixed on the ground, unwilling to witness the king in his moment of collapse. Darius drew a ragged breath, the cold air burning his lungs. He had to know. He gripped the edges of the stone, his knuckles turning white, and leaned closer to the narrow gap at the top. "Daniel," he called out, his voice thin and strained with a grief that had kept him pacing through the long night. "Daniel, has your God saved you?" He held his breath, listening for any shift of movement, any sound of life from the depths. Days before the stone was rolled into place, the palace hummed with the steady grind of administration. Daniel moved through the courtyards with a measured, purposeful gait. His eyes were constantly scanning scrolls, his mind calculating the flow of grain and tax. A merchant approached him near the northern archway, sliding a heavy, gold-filled pouch across the stone table. Daniel did not look up. He pushed the pouch back across the surface with the tip of his stylus, his expression unchanging, and continued his work without a word. He resolved disputes with a cold, terrifying fairness that left no room for favor. King Darius watched from the balcony above. He saw the consistency of the man, the way his decisions stood firm regardless of the pressure applied by desperate men. The king needed order in a kingdom prone to chaos, and he found it in this one man. He stood, signaled his aide, and began to draft the order to elevate Daniel above every official in the realm. It was a promotion earned through years of silence and labor. A move that made the palace corridors feel suddenly, sharply smaller for those who watched from the shadows. The news of the promotion spread like wildfire through the stone corridors. Two senior officials stood in the dim light of an archway, their faces twisted with calculation. They began their assault at midnight. They dragged every scroll Daniel had touched out of the archives, piling them high on a heavy oak table. They scrutinized his tax ledgers, cross-referencing grain shipments against royal inventories, searching for a single missing coin or a hidden bribe. They worked until their fingers were stained with ink, and their eyes burned from the flicker of guttering candles. Hours bled into one another. They looked for greed, for a lapse in judgment, for any sign of a human weakness they could exploit. But the records were flawless. Every calculation balanced. Every decision was documented with brutal accuracy. The lead official slammed his fist against the table, rattling the inkwells. There was no leverage here, no legal foothold to drag him down. They stepped into the shadows, whispering, their voices jagged and low. They realized then that Daniel's integrity was a fortress. If they could not break the man through his work, they would have to strike at his lifeblood. They turned their gaze toward the upstairs room where the wooden shutters faced the east. They knew the only way to destroy him was to turn his daily prayer into a death sentence. The conspirators approached the throne room with heads bowed and voices smooth as polished glass. They brought with them a scroll, weighted with the authority of the entire governing council. They spoke of unity, of a kingdom that needed a single, undivided devotion to the crown. They proposed a decree. For 30 days, no man should petition any god or human, save for the king himself. They framed it as a testament to the king's supreme power, a way to solidify his reign and demand absolute loyalty from the masses. Darius listened, his gaze drifting over the ornate carvings of the room. He saw the logic of a unified empire, the appeal of a kingdom that bowed only to him. He did not see the trap woven into the fine print. He reached for his signet ring, the gold heavy and cold against his skin. He pressed the seal into the soft, wet clay at the base of the document. The wax hardened instantly, locking the decree into the law of the Medes and Persians. A single, audible click echoed in the silent hall as the ring left the impression. The trap was set. The conspirators retreated, their expressions unreadable, while the king remained, his hands still resting on the parchment that had just turned his favor into a lethal weapon. Daniel stood in his office when the decree was announced. The words of the heralds hung in the air, heavy and sharp. He did not ask for a copy of the scroll. He did not seek an audience with the king to plead his case. Instead, he walked from the courtyard, his pace steady, and climbed the stairs to his private room. He reached the wooden lattice shutters that faced the east. With a sharp click, he threw them wide, letting the afternoon light flood the space. He knew the conspirators were waiting in the streets below, their eyes fixed on his window like hounds. He did not close the curtains. He did not hide in the corners of the room. He walked to the center of the stone floor, knelt, and placed his hands palms up. He bowed his head. The city outside continued its noise, but in the room, the silence was absolute. He began to pray, his voice a low, rhythmic murmur that broke the barrier of the law he had been ordered to obey. Below, the conspirators stepped from the shadows, pointing upward as they saw the silhouette framed against the sky. Daniel did not look down. He remained fixed in place, his commitment to his faith overriding the threat of the lions. Darius did not wait for the sun to set. When the conspirators arrived with their report, the king saw the trap in its entirety. He slammed his fist against the map table, scattering scrolls across the floor. He spent the remaining hours of the day pacing the length of his chambers, his footsteps heavy and uneven. He summoned his wisest counselors, demanding to know if a royal decree could be suspended by a secondary act. They shook their heads. The law of the Medes and Persians was absolute. He searched the archives for any precedent of mercy, any loophole in the phrasing, but every page he turned only confirmed his error. The officials stood at the threshold of his room, their faces like stone, refusing to offer a single concession. They reminded him of the permanence of his signet. He tried to argue, his voice rising in frustration, but the cold rigidity of the law silenced him. The trap was not just on Daniel. It was on the king himself. He sat on his throne, his hands gripping the armrests until his knuckles turned white. He had built an empire on order, and now that very order was demanding the life of the only man he truly trusted. The sun began to bleed into the horizon, and with every passing minute, his window for action closed. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the courtyard. Darius walked at the head of the procession, his jaw set, leading the way to the outskirts of the palace grounds. Guards flanked Daniel on either side. They stopped before a jagged opening in the earth. The smell of raw meat and musk drifted upward from the dark pit. Below, 4 shadows detached themselves from the walls, 2 males with heavy manes, and 2 females pacing with a rhythmic, predatory grace. They did not roar, they watched. The guards tightened their grip on the ropes, lowering Daniel into the gloom. His boots touched the floor, and the lions drifted toward him, their eyes catching the fading light. Darius stood at the edge, his breath hitching in his chest as he looked down one last time. He gave the signal. The guards heaved a massive, circular stone slab across the opening. It ground against the rock with a final, jarring thud. The king stepped forward, pressed his signet ring into the soft, warm wax on the seal, and stared at the immovable wall of stone. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the faint, muffled sound of movement from deep within the earth. Back in his private quarters, the king dismissed his attendants. He refused the evening meal. The silver platters remained untouched, the steam rising and vanishing into the cold air. He paced the floorboards until his feet ached, his eyes fixed on the distant, sealed entrance to the den. He ignored the music of the lute players, gesturing for them to leave the hall. The palace fell into a suffocating stillness. Meanwhile, beneath the city, the air in the den grew heavy. The lions prowled the perimeter, their pads thudding against the stone, but as they neared the center, they stopped. An indistinct light, soft and impossible, filled the enclosure, standing as a barrier between the man and the beasts. The lions lowered their heads, their growls fading into shallow, rhythmic breathing. Daniel sat against the wall, his spine straight, his hands resting on his knees. He did not watch the predators. He looked into the darkness as if he were in his own prayer room. The king continued his vigil, staring through his window at the stars, his hands gripping his staff so tightly that his knuckles turned bloodless. He waited for a sound, a scream, or silence, anything to tell him if the dawn would bring justice or finality. The horizon bled a thin, pale gray, then gold. Darius did not wait for his guards. He burst from the palace gates, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his stride uneven as he sprinted toward the sealed enclosure. He reached the stone, his hands clawing at the rough, cold surface. He leaned his forehead against the rock, his voice cracking as he shouted into the dark. "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God been able to rescue you?" He pressed his ear to the stone, bracing for the silence of death. A heartbeat passed, then another. From the deep, hollow resonance of the pit, a voice rose. It was steady, clear, utterly without fear. "O King, live forever. My God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight and before you. O King, I have done no wrong." Darius stumbled back, his hands falling to his sides as the weight of the night dissolved. He turned, eyes wide, and bellowed for his men to bring tools, his voice now echoing with a desperate, frantic command to move the stone immediately. The heavy stone groaned against the ground as the guards pushed it aside. Dust puffed into the morning air. Daniel stepped out, blinking as the sunlight hit his face, his frame steady, his body unmarked by the night. Darius reached out, gripping his shoulders, searching for a single wound. But there was only the smell of the pit. The king stood before his court and issued a new decree, his voice carrying across the courtyard, mandating respect for the God who saves. The conspirators were nowhere to be seen. Daniel did not pause to celebrate or seek vengeance. He walked back to the administrative halls, his stride as measured and calm as it had been before the storm. He picked up the scrolls, dipped his pen, and returned to the work of the realm. The threat had passed, but the man had not changed. He sat at his desk and began to read, his attention fixed on the task at hand. His survival was not a sudden miracle of the moment, but the harvest of years spent doing right when no one was watching. He worked until sunset, as he had for decades, proving that true courage is the quiet, steady result of a life built on truth.